Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine something with me. Imagine a number so large that if you started counting right now, one number per second, you wouldn't finish before the sun exploded. Now multiply that by 1 billion, then do it again, and you still haven't even scratched the surface of eternity. This isn't just a fun thought experiment. This is about understanding your place in something so vast, so impossibly enormous, that your brain literally cannot comprehend it, and yet somehow impossibly beautifully you're here right now, conscious and aware, in this exact moment, connected to all of it. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through 100 facts about eternity, about the timeline of the future, about what happens next in this universe we're floating through. And I promise you, by the end of this journey, you'll never look at your life, your problems, or your purpose the same way again. Before we dive into the cosmic ocean ahead, I need you to understand something important. This isn't going to be a dry science lecture. Yes, we're going to talk about physics, about time, about the heat death of the universe and quantum mechanics. But more than that, this is about you. About why your brief flicker of consciousness matters in a universe that will outlast you by trillions upon trillions of years. This is about finding peace, meaning, and even joy in the face of incomprehensible vastness. So get comfortable, let your mind relax, and let's begin this journey together into forever. Here's what makes eternity so difficult for us to grasp. Your brain evolved to think in human timescales. Days, seasons, maybe a few decades if you're really planning ahead. We can kind of imagine 100 years, maybe even 1,000 if we stretch our minds. But eternity? Eternity breaks our mental machinery. It's like trying to fit the ocean into a teaspoon. And yet, understanding eternity, even just glimpsing it, changes everything about how you live right now in this moment, in this brief cosmic e-blink of your existence. Let me start with something that might comfort you or terrify you, depending on how you look at it. Fact number 1. In approximately 5 billion years, our sun will begin dying, expanding into a red giant that will eventually consume Mercury, Venus, and quite possibly Earth itself. 5 billion years. That sounds like forever, doesn't it? But in the timeline of eternity, it's nothing. It's not even the opening credits of the movie. It's the flash before the opening credits begin. Fact number 2. Long before the sun dies, in about 1 billion years, the sun's increasing brightness will make Earth uninhabitable for most life as we know it. The oceans will evaporate. The atmosphere will change. Everything you know, everything humanity has ever built, every city and monument and memory, will have long since turned to dust and vapor. This isn't pessimism. This is just physics, and there's something strangely peaceful about it. Fact number 3. If humanity survives, and that's a genuine if, we'll need to become a multi-planetary species within the next few 100,000 years at most. We'll need to spread out across the solar system, then across the galaxy, then perhaps across the universe itself. We'll need to become something more than we are now. We'll need to evolve, transform, transcend our biological limitations. We might become digital consciousnesses uploaded into machines. We might merge with artificial intelligence. We might become beings of pure energy or light or something we can't even imagine yet. Fact number 4. The nearest galaxy to our own Milky Way is Andromeda, and it's currently hurtling toward us at about 110 kilometers per second. In approximately 4 billion years, our two galaxies will collide. Now, don't panic. Space is so vast that even when galaxies collide, individual stars rarely hit each other. It's like throwing 2 swarms of fireflies at each other in a football stadium. Most will just pass by. But the gravitational dance will reshape both galaxies entirely, creating a new supergalaxy that astronomers have already nicknamed Milkomeda. Isn't that beautiful? Even galaxies are temporary. Even these massive structures that contain hundreds of billions of stars are just temporary patterns in the cosmic dance. Fact number 5. Right now, this very second, the universe is expanding. Not just expanding, but accelerating its expansion. Galaxies are moving away from each other faster and faster, driven by something called dark energy that we barely understand. This means that in the far future, billions of years from now, if any conscious beings exist, they'll look up at their night sky and see almost nothing. No other galaxies, no distant stars, just their own galaxy, alone in an ocean of darkness. They might not even know other galaxies exist. The evidence will have literally moved beyond their cosmic horizon. Fact number 6, there's a concept in cosmology called the Big Rip. It's one possible fate of our universe. If dark energy continues to increase in strength, eventually, billions of years from now, the expansion of space itself will become so extreme that it will tear apart galaxies, then solar systems, then planets, then molecules, then atoms, then even the fundamental particles of matter. The universe will literally rip itself apart at the seams. Everything will be shredded into its most basic components, and then those components will be shredded too, until nothing remains but scattered energy in an infinitely expanding void. Fact number 7, another possible fate is the Big Freeze, also called the heat death of the universe. In this scenario, the universe continues expanding forever, but eventually reaches a state of maximum entropy. This means all energy becomes evenly distributed. No more stars form, no more planets, no more life. Just a cold, dark, uniform sea of particles spread so thin that nothing can ever interact with anything else ever again. Eternal darkness. Eternal cold. Eternal stillness. This is currently considered the most likely fate of our universe based on our current understanding of physics. Fact number 8. There's also the Big Crunch, where the universe's expansion eventually reverses, and everything comes crashing back together into a single point, possibly creating another Big Bang and starting the whole cycle over again. An eternal cosmic heartbeat expanding and contracting, creating and destroying universes forever and ever in an endless loop. Though current evidence suggests this is unlikely, it remains a theoretical possibility. Fact number 9. In about 100 trillion years, the last star in the universe will die. Let me say that again. 100 trillion years from now, the last star will burn out. No more sunrises anywhere in the cosmos. No more light. Just dead stellar remnants, black holes, and wandering planets in endless night. And 100 trillion years is just the beginning of eternity. It's essentially zero on the timeline we're exploring. Fact number 10. After the stars die, the universe will enter what's called the black hole era. For an incomprehensibly long time, the dominant objects in the universe will be black holes. Those gravitational monsters that trap everything, even light itself. But even black holes aren't eternal. Through a process called Hawking radiation discovered theoretically by physicist Stephen Hawking, black holes very slowly evaporate over time. Very, very slowly. A black hole with the mass of our sun would take about 10 to the 67th power years to completely evaporate. That's a 1 with 67 zeros after it. Your mind can't hold that number. Neither can mine. Fact number 11. The supermassive black holes at the centers of galaxies, the monsters that contain millions or billions of times the mass of our sun, will take even longer to evaporate. We're talking 10 to the 100th power years. Timescales so vast that they make the current age of the universe, a mere 13.8 billion years, seem like an infinitesimal spark. Fact number 12. After even the black holes evaporate, the universe will enter what's called the dark era. This is when the universe becomes a cold, dark, incredibly dilute sea of photons, neutrinos, electrons, and positrons, all spread so far apart that they might as well be alone in infinity. Occasionally, very occasionally, over timescales of 10 to the 1,000 power years or longer, random quantum fluctuations might create brief structures, maybe even temporary conscious observers, emerging from pure statistical chance and immediately dissolving back into the void. Fact number 13. Some theories suggest that given infinite time, anything that's physically possible, no matter how unlikely, will eventually happen. This means that over vast enough timescales, random fluctuations could potentially create new Big Bangs, new universes, new everything. Eternity might be filled with spontaneous births of cosmos after cosmos, separated by gulfs of time so vast that calling them lonely doesn't even begin to describe it. Fact number 14. There's a fascinating thought experiment called the Boltzmann brain. Given enough time in a vast, empty universe, random quantum fluctuations could theoretically assemble a functioning human brain, complete with false memories of a life it never lived, which would exist for just a moment before dissolving back into chaos. In an infinite universe with infinite time, there might be countless such spontaneous consciousnesses appearing and disappearing, each absolutely convinced they're real, each living and dying in a cosmic instant. Fact number 15. Here's where things get weird and wonderful. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that our universe might be just one of infinitely many universes in a multiverse. Every quantum possibility might spawn a new universe where that possibility became reality. This means there might be infinite versions of you, living infinite variations of your life, making different choices, experiencing different outcomes, all happening simultaneously in parallel realities. Fact number 16. If the multiverse exists, then eternity isn't just about time. It's also about space and possibility. There might be universes where the laws of physics are completely different. Universes where stars never form. Universes made entirely of exotic matter we can't even imagine. Universes where consciousness takes forms so alien we couldn't recognize it. Universes where time runs backward or doesn't exist at all. Fact number 17. In our own universe, even after the heat death, there remains the possibility of quantum tunneling events that could spontaneously create new Big Bangs. The probability is infinitesimally small, but given infinite time, even infinitesimal probabilities approach certainty. This means our universe might eventually give birth to new universes, which give birth to more universes in an eternal chain of cosmic reproduction. Fact number 18. Right now, you are made of atoms that were forged in the hearts of ancient stars that exploded billions of years ago. The carbon in your DNA, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, all of it was created by nuclear fusion, in stellar furnaces, or in the violent deaths of supernova. You are literally made of stardust. And eventually those atoms will return to the cosmos and be recycled into new stars, new planets, maybe new life. Your matter is eternal, even if your current pattern is temporary. Fact number 19. Information might be eternal too. There's a fierce debate in physics about whether information is truly destroyed when it falls into a black hole or whether it's somehow preserved. If information can never be truly destroyed, then in some sense everything that ever happens leaves a permanent mark on the universe. Your thoughts, your choices, your existence might be encoded somehow in the fundamental fabric of reality forever. Fact number 20. The concept of now is more complicated than you think. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time is relative. There's no universal present moment. What's happening now for you is different from what's happening now for someone moving at a different speed or in a different gravitational field. In a sense, all moments, past, present, and future, exist simultaneously in what physicists call the block universe. You're not moving through time. You're a four-dimensional structure extended through space-time, and consciousness is just experiencing slices of that structure moment by moment. Fact number 21. If time is an illusion and all moments exist simultaneously, then you never truly die. The moments of your life exist forever in the space-time structure of the universe. Right now, as you listen to this, there's a version of you embedded eternally in the cosmic fabric. You're always there, always alive in that moment, even as other moments of you age and eventually cease to be conscious. Fact number 22. Let's talk about something more near-term. In about 50,000 years, if humans are still around and still keeping track, the stars in our night sky will have moved enough that the constellations we know will be noticeably different. The Big Dipper will be stretched and distorted. Orion will lose his recognizable shape. The patterns our ancestors used to navigate and tell stories will have shifted into new patterns, inspiring new stories for new people. Fact number 23. In about 1 million years, the star Betelgeuse, that beautiful red supergiant in the constellation Orion, will likely have exploded in a supernova. When it does, it will briefly become as bright as the full moon in our sky, visible even during the day. If humans still exist, they'll look up and see a new star blazing in the heavens, a cosmic reminder that everything ends, even stars that have burned for millions of years. But here's the beautiful part. That explosion won't destroy us. We're safe, 642 light-years away. We'll just get a front-row seat to one of the universe's greatest shows, a reminder written in light across the cosmos that destruction and creation are two sides of the same coin. Fact number 24. Your body is replacing itself constantly, but not all at once. Red blood cells last about 4 months. Your skin cells? Roughly 2 to 3 weeks. The cells lining your stomach get replaced every few days because of the harsh acidic environment. But here's where it gets interesting. Some cells, like the neurons in your cerebral cortex, last your entire lifetime. They're with you from birth to death, storing memories, forming connections, making you who you are. So when someone asks if you're the same person you were 7 years ago, the answer is both yes and no. You're a ship constantly rebuilding itself while sailing forward, most of the wood replaced, but the vessel somehow still the same. Fact number 25. There's a phenomenon called semantic satiation, where if you repeat a word over and over, it temporarily loses its meaning. Say bowl 50 times and suddenly it's just a sound, disconnected from the object it represents. This reveals something profound about how your brain works. Meaning isn't inherent in words themselves. It's something your mind actively constructs, a bridge it builds between sound and concept. When you overload that system, the bridge collapses, and you're left staring at the arbitrary nature of language itself. It's unsettling and fascinating, a glimpse behind the curtain of consciousness. Fact number 26. The Amazon rainforest produces about 20% of the world's oxygen, right? Wrong. That's one of the most widespread myths out there. The Amazon does produce enormous amounts of oxygen through photosynthesis, but it also consumes nearly all of it through respiration and decomposition. The net oxygen contribution is close to zero. So where does our oxygen actually come from? The ocean. Specifically, microscopic phytoplankton drifting in the surface waters, invisible to the naked eye but responsible for producing about 50 to 80% of the oxygen in our atmosphere. These microscopic organisms are so small, so seemingly insignificant, that you could hold millions of them in a single drop of seawater. Yet collectively, they've been keeping every land animal alive for hundreds of millions of years. Every breath you've ever taken, every breath your parents took, your grandparents, every human who ever lived, owes a debt to these tiny ocean drifters you've never seen and will never meet. Think about that for a second. We plant trees for oxygen. We protect rainforests. We celebrate forests as the lungs of the earth, and yes, they matter, they absolutely do. But the real atmospheric factory, the main source of breathable air, is floating in the ocean, invisible, uncelebrated, largely forgotten in our daily consciousness. The Amazon rainforest is incredible, but it's the ocean's phytoplankton doing the heavy lifting for our survival. And here's what really keeps me up at night. These phytoplankton are incredibly sensitive to temperature changes. As ocean temperatures rise, their populations shift, sometimes decline. Some regions are seeing phytoplankton levels drop significantly. We're talking about the organisms that produce most of our oxygen, and they're responding to the warming we've caused. It's not some distant future problem. It's happening now, measurable, documented, but most of us don't know. We worry about carbon dioxide levels, which we should. We worry about sea level rise, which we should. But the oxygen production system, the thing that literally determines whether we can breathe, it barely makes headlines, because it's invisible, because it's easy to take for granted what we've always had. But when you lose it even for a few hours, you realize just how fragile everything is. In 2021, Facebook went down for 6 hours. Just Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, not the whole internet, just one company's services. And the world lost its mind. Small businesses couldn't reach customers. People couldn't contact family abroad. Emergency groups that relied on WhatsApp for coordination were paralyzed. In some countries, people couldn't even log into other services because they used login with Facebook. 6 hours. One company. Chaos. Now imagine the entire internet going dark, not for hours, for weeks. Maybe longer. No GPS to navigate. No weather forecasts updating in real time. No online banking. No streaming services. No way to work remotely. No food delivery apps, no ride sharing, no online shopping. Every system we've built in the last 2 decades grinds to a halt. And here's the thing most people don't realize. The internet isn't designed to come back easily. When power grids fail, we have protocols, backup generators, manual overrides, physical infrastructure we can see and touch and repair. But the internet? It's thousands of interconnected systems, satellites, fiber optic cables, server farms, DNS servers, routing protocols, all dependent on each other, all requiring precise synchronization. If a solar storm took it all down simultaneously, we couldn't just flip a switch and bring it back. We'd need to rebuild it piece by piece, test every connection, verify every protocol, replace damaged hardware in facilities scattered across the globe. It could take months, maybe years to fully restore everything to what it was. And in that time, society would fundamentally change. Think about the generation growing up right now. Kids who've never known a world without instant answers, without constant connection, without the ability to reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. Suddenly they're living in 1985. No Google to answer questions, no YouTube to learn skills, no social media to stay connected, no online communities for support. Just silence. The psychological impact alone would be staggering. We've become so dependent on digital connection that many people would feel genuinely isolated, even if they're surrounded by others. because we've forgotten how to connect without screens. But let's think about what happens in those early weeks. Because this is where things get genuinely frightening. Without internet, the entire structure of modern commerce collapses overnight. And I'm not just talking about Amazon deliveries being delayed. I'm talking about the fundamental mechanics of how money moves, how goods get distributed, how businesses operate. Every credit card transaction, gone. Every digital payment system, useless. We'd be forced back to cash almost immediately. But here's the problem. Most banks don't actually keep that much physical cash on hand anymore. They rely on digital transfers, electronic records, computerized systems. When the internet dies, so does your ability to access most of your money. Think about that for a second. Your bank balance is just numbers in a database. Without internet connectivity, those numbers can't be verified, can't be transferred, can't be accessed. Your entire financial existence becomes theoretical. ATMs would run dry within hours as people panic and withdraw whatever they can. But most people wouldn't even get that chance. The machines would simply stop working, displaying error messages to increasingly desperate crowds. Grocery stores would face an immediate crisis, not just because their payment systems are down, but because their entire supply chain relies on internet-connected logistics. Modern supermarkets operate on a just-in-time inventory system. They don't stockpile goods, they rely on constant computer-coordinated deliveries based on real-time sales data. Without the internet, stores can't order new stock, distribution centers can't coordinate deliveries, trucks can't receive routing information. The entire system seizes up like an engine without oil. Within 3 days, most grocery store shelves would be empty. Not because there's no food, but because there's no way to efficiently move it from where it is to where it's needed. The food exists. The distribution network just became paralyzed. And this is where human nature shows its darkest side, because scarcity breeds panic, and panic breeds chaos. Picture this, you're standing in a grocery store parking lot at 5 a.m. The doors don't open for another hour, but there are already 200 people in line ahead of you. You can see them through the darkness, illuminated by the harsh glow of streetlights, their breath-forming clouds in the cold morning air. When those doors finally open, what happens isn't shopping, it's survival instinct in action. People sprint toward the water aisle, not walk. Sprint. I'm talking about your neighbor, the one who smiles and waves at you every morning. I'm talking about the teacher who educates your kids, the accountant, the grandmother, ordinary people transformed by fear into something unrecognizable. And here's what makes this so visceral. They're not fighting over luxury items. They're fighting over the one thing humans literally cannot live without for more than 3 days. That changes everything about the psychology at play. You grab a case of water bottles. Someone grabs the other end. You lock eyes. For just a moment, civilization hangs in the balance. Who lets go? In that split second, you're calculating, do I have enough at home? Does my family need this more than theirs? What if there's no more tomorrow? This exact scenario played out thousands of times across affected regions. Security footage from retail stores showed shopping behavior that looked more like Black Friday riots than orderly commerce. But this wasn't about getting a discount on a television. This was about securing the resource that determines whether your children can drink, eat, bathe. Store managers found themselves in impossible positions. Do you limit purchases to 1 case per person? Sounds fair, except families of 5 need more than families of 2. Do you serve first come first served? That penalizes people who couldn't leave work or who didn't hear about the shortage in time. Some stores tried rationing systems. Others attempted lottery systems. Nothing worked perfectly because there's no perfect solution when demand infinitely exceeds supply. And the prices. Oh, the prices. When a single gallon of water that normally costs $1 suddenly costs $20, $30, even $50 on secondary markets, you're witnessing economic theory collide with human desperation. Price gouging laws exist precisely to prevent this exploitation, but enforcement becomes nearly impossible when everyone's a potential seller. And here's what really gets under my skin. The price gouging isn't even the worst part. It's the counterfeit crisis that follows. When legitimate supplies vanish and desperation peaks, that's when the predators really come out to play. Picture this, you're scrolling through social media during a hurricane aftermath, and you see someone selling cases of water bottles. The images look legitimate. The price is high but not insane. You're thirsty, your kids are thirsty, so you send the money. What arrives 3 days later, if anything arrives at all, might be tap water in resealed bottles, or bottles that sat in someone's garage for 3 years. Or nothing at all, just empty promises and a blocked account. The FBI estimates that disaster-related fraud increases by over 300% in the immediate aftermath of major emergencies. 300%. We're not talking about a few bad actors, we are talking about organized networks that specifically target crisis zones, knowing that desperate people make quick decisions with limited verification. I came across one case where a group was selling emergency water purification tablets during a contamination scare. Turns out they were literally just crushed vitamin C tablets repackaged in official-looking containers. People were paying $20 for what amounted to 10 cents worth of grocery store supplements, believing they were protecting their families from waterborne diseases. And the psychological damage this causes extends far beyond the immediate financial loss. When you've been scammed during your most vulnerable moment, when someone has exploited your fear for your family's safety to make a quick buck, it erodes something fundamental. It breaks the social contract in ways that take years to repair. Trust becomes a casualty. The next time there's an emergency, you hesitate. You second-guess offers of help. You wonder if that neighbor selling bottles from their garage is genuine or opportunistic. That hesitation, that loss of community cohesion during the exact moments when community matters most. That's the real cost of these scams. But let's zoom out from the criminals for a moment and talk about the systems that should be preventing all of this. Because here's what really gets under my skin. We have sophisticated systems supposedly protecting us. The Federal Trade Commission has rules. The Food and Drug Administration has enforcement powers. State attorneys general have entire consumer protection divisions. And yet, in disaster after disaster, the scams proliferate like weeds in an untended garden. Why? Because the internet moves faster than regulatory frameworks designed in the 20th century. A scammer can spin up a website, run Facebook ads targeting specific zip codes affected by a hurricane, collect thousands in fraudulent orders, and disappear before any agency even opens an investigation. The infrastructure for e-commerce and digital payment processing, the very systems that make legitimate disaster relief possible, they're the same systems that enable industrial-scale fraud. And here's the uncomfortable truth nobody in Silicon Valley wants to discuss. The platforms profit from this chaos. Every fraudulent ad bought on Facebook or Google generates revenue. Every scam website using Shopify's infrastructure pays transaction fees. Every fake charity collecting donations through payment processors leaves behind a percentage. I'm not saying these companies deliberately enable fraud, but their business models create perverse incentives where stopping scams quickly isn't always the priority. Think about it. When a major disaster hits, advertising spending in affected regions spikes dramatically. Emergency supplies, recovery services, charitable giving, it all translates to ad revenue. The platforms have fraud detection systems, sure, but those systems calibrated to balance catching bad actors against not frustrating legitimate advertisers. And in that balance, especially during the chaos of a disaster when everything's moving fast, plenty of scams slip through. I've seen the pattern repeatedly. A wildfire tears through California. Within hours, sponsored posts appear offering air purifiers, claiming to filter wildfire smoke with NASA-developed technology. Sounds great, right? Except the company was registered 3 days ago, the product is drop-shipped from overseas, and it'll arrive in 6 weeks if it arrives at all. By the time enough people report it, the damage is done. The victims aren't just losing money, they're losing trust. And that erosion of trust, that's the real casualty here. Because once you've been burned by a fake ad, once you've handed over your credit card details to what looked like a legitimate company, only to realize it was a ghost, you start questioning everything. Is that charity real? Is that news article manipulated? Can I trust any ad I see? And Facebook knows this is happening. They absolutely know. They have teams of engineers, data scientists, and content moderators. They have AI systems that can detect a nipple in a fraction of a second, that can identify copyrighted music in a 3-second clip. But somehow, magically, they can't detect that an ad promoting miracle weight, lost pills with before and after photos stolen from medical websites is fraudulent. Let me be clear, it's not that they can't, it's that the incentive structure doesn't push them to. Every ad that runs, even a scam ad, generates revenue, and the measures they'd need to implement to truly stop this, real human review, aggressive pre-screening, meaningful consequences for repeat offenders, those cost money. They cut into the profit margin, so instead they do the minimum. They have a reporting system that feels designed to exhaust you. You report an ad, and you get a generic response 3 days later saying it doesn't violate their policies. Meanwhile, that same scam is running in 17 different variations, targeting your grandmother, your neighbor, your coworker. The excuse is always scale. We have billions of users, millions of ads, we can't catch everything. But here's the thing about scale. When you're making tens of billions of dollars, scale isn't an excuse. It's a responsibility. You have the resources to solve this problem. You just choose not to because the cost of solving it exceeds the cost of ignoring it. And the psychological manipulation goes even deeper. These platforms have spent years, over a decade now, training us to scroll, to engage, to react without thinking. The entire interface is designed to lower your critical thinking, to keep you in that flow state where you're just consuming. And in that state, your defenses are down. And when your defenses are down, that's when the real manipulation happens. Because here's what most people don't realize. You're not just scrolling through random content. Every single thing you see has been carefully selected by an algorithm that knows you better than you know yourself. It's studied your behavior for years. It knows what makes you stop, what makes you angry, what makes you share. And the algorithm has learned something critical. Outrage performs better than nuance. Fear spreads faster than hope. Divisiveness gets more engagement than unity. So that's what it feeds you. Not because there's some evil mastermind behind it, but because the system is designed to maximize one thing, your attention. And your attention is most easily captured by content that triggers an emotional response. Think about the last political video you watched on TikTok or Instagram. Did it present a balanced perspective? Did it acknowledge complexity? Or did it paint the other side as either complete villains or total idiots? I'm willing to bet it was the latter, because that's what the algorithm rewards. That's what gets shared. That's what keeps you engaged. And here's the really insidious part. The more you engage with that content, the more the algorithm shows you similar content. You watch one video criticizing a political figure. The algorithm assumes you want to see 50 more. You engage with one conspiracy theory. Suddenly your feed is full of them. It's called a filter bubble, and we're all living in one. The algorithm isn't showing you reality. It's showing you a carefully curated version of reality, designed to keep you engaged, to keep you coming back, to keep you in a state of heightened emotion. And over time, this warps your perception. You start to believe that everyone thinks like the people in your feed. You start to see the other side not as people with different perspectives, but as enemies, as threats, as fundamentally broken or stupid or evil. This is how social media platforms have become the most effective polarization machines ever created. Not through force, but through psychological manipulation so subtle, so gradual, that most people don't even realize it's happening. You think you're just staying informed, just staying connected, just passing time. But what you're actually doing is allowing yourself to be psychologically conditioned, day after day, scroll after scroll, into seeing the world through an increasingly distorted lens. And the worst part? You don't even realize it's happening. That's the insidious nature of algorithmic manipulation. It doesn't announce itself. There's no warning label that pops up saying, "Caution, your perception of reality is being actively reshaped." It just happens quietly, invisibly, one curated post at a time. Think about how you felt about certain topics 5 years ago versus now. Not because you did deep research or had meaningful conversations, but because of what you saw repeated over and over in your feed. The algorithm didn't change your mind through persuasion. It changed your mind through exposure, through repetition, through the sheer volume of content pointing in one direction while suppressing everything else. This is what psychologists call the mere exposure effect. The more you see something, the more normal it becomes, the more acceptable, the more true it feels, even without evidence. And social media platforms have turned this psychological principle into a science. They're not just showing you content, they're engineering familiarity. They're manufacturing consensus. They're creating the illusion that everyone thinks a certain way, believes certain things when in reality you're just seeing what the algorithm wants you to see. And here's where it gets truly dangerous. When everyone's algorithm is different, we stop living in a shared reality. We're all walking around with completely different versions of what's happening in the world. What you consider an undeniable fact, someone else has never even heard of. What outrages you doesn't even appear in their feed. We're not just disagreeing anymore. We're living in separate informational universes. This is why conversations have become so impossible. Why families can't talk about certain topics anymore. Why friendships dissolve over political posts. It's not just that we disagree. It's that we've been fed completely different information, different context, different framing, to the point where we can't even establish common ground anymore. And here's what makes it even more insidious. The algorithm doesn't just feed us different information, it feeds us different emotions. It learns what makes us angry, what makes us scared, what makes us feel righteous and superior, and then it serves us more of exactly that. It's not optimizing for truth, it's optimizing for engagement. And unfortunately, outrage is the most engaging emotion of all. There's a reason why doom scrolling is called doom scrolling. It's addictive. You know you should stop, but you can't. Just one more post, just one more video, just one more article that confirms what you already believe and makes you feel like everyone else is crazy. The algorithm has learned that if it can get you emotionally activated, you'll stay on the platform longer, which means more ads, which means more money. And political actors know this. They've figured out how to game the system. They craft messages specifically designed to trigger emotional responses. They don't need to be accurate. They don't need to be fair. They just need to be engaging. A lie that makes you angry will spread faster than a truth that makes you think. So when you encounter someone from the other side now, you're not just encountering different opinions. You're encountering someone who's been emotionally conditioned by a completely different information diet. They're not just seeing different facts. They're feeling different feelings about those facts. They've been primed to react with anger or fear or disgust. And you have too. That's the thing we don't want to admit. We like to think we're immune, that we're the rational ones, that we see through the manipulation. But the algorithm works on everyone. He doesn't care about your politics. He just cares about keeping you engaged. This is why conversations have become so impossible. We're not just divided by information anymore. We're divided by emotion, by visceral, gut-level reactions that have been carefully cultivated and reinforced thousands of times. You can't logic someone out of a position they didn't logic themselves into. And increasingly, our political positions aren't based on logic at all. They're based on emotional conditioning. This is why political debates feel so exhausting. You're not really arguing about policy. You're arguing against someone's emotional immune system. You're fighting against dopamine pathways that have been carved into their brain over thousands of micro-interactions. Think about the last time you tried to change someone's mind about politics. Really tried. What happened? If you're honest, probably nothing. Or worse, they dug in harder. That's called the backfire effect, and it's not a bug. It's a feature. When you challenge someone's deeply held belief, especially one tied to their identity, their brain treats it like a physical threat. The amygdala lights up. Cortisol floods the system. They're not being stubborn. They're being human. And here's where it gets really dark. The algorithm knows this. It knows that the more entrenched you become, the more predictable you are. And predictable users are profitable users. If I can predict what you'll click, what you'll watch, what you'll buy, I can serve you the exact content that keeps you scrolling. The exact ad that converts. The exact outrage that brings you back tomorrow. You become a data point, a behavioral pattern, a conversion rate. This is the hidden cost of algorithmic curation. It's not just that we're divided, it's that we're being systematically trained to stay divided because division is the business model. Anger drives engagement. Fear drives retention. Tribalism drives growth. Every tech company will tell you they want to bring people together. But look at what they actually optimize for. Watch time, click-through rate, daily active users. These metrics don't care about truth, nuance, or understanding. They care about keeping your eyes on the screen. And your brain? Your brain is trying its best. It evolved to keep you alive in small tribes, not to navigate a global information ecosystem designed by engagement engineers. It's like asking a fish to climb a tree. You're not failing. The environment was designed to make you fail. But here's where it gets even more insidious. The school system doesn't just fail to accommodate your brain. It actively punishes the very traits that make ADHD brains exceptional. You hyperfocus on something you're passionate about. That's obsessive or inappropriate. You need to move to think? That's disruptive. You ask questions that challenge the standard explanation? That's argumentative or disrespectful. I remember spending an entire weekend building an elaborate Lego city, complete with a working drawbridge system I designed myself. I didn't eat, barely slept, was completely in the zone. When I tried to bring it to school for show and tell, my teacher said, "This is nice, but you really should spend this kind of energy on your homework." Translation: your natural gift for intense focus when genuinely interested is worthless unless it serves our agenda. The educational psychologist Edward Hallowell, who has ADHD himself, calls this the tragedy of ADHD in schools. He says we take children who are often wildly creative, entrepreneurial, and innovative thinkers, and we systematically teach them that their way of thinking is wrong. And the saddest part? By the time you're an adult, you've internalized these messages so deeply that you continue the punishment yourself. You don't need teachers anymore to tell you you're doing it wrong. You've become your own harshest critic. You finally start that project you're excited about, and within minutes that voice kicks in. Why bother? You'll just abandon it like everything else. You try a new organizational system, and when it doesn't work perfectly, you think, "See? I really am hopeless." This is what psychologists call learned helplessness. After enough experiences where your efforts don't lead to success, your brain starts to believe that success is impossible. So why try? But here's what you need to understand. That voice isn't truth. It's trauma. It's the accumulated weight of 1,000 small moments where the world told you that you weren't enough, where your best efforts were met with disappointment, where your brain's natural wiring was treated like a character flaw. And here's the thing that makes it even more insidious. You start to believe it. You internalize those messages. They become the voice in your head that whispers you're lazy when you can't start a project. That tells you you're broken when you can't focus on something that bores you to tears. That convinces you that everyone else has it together and you're the only one falling apart. But what if I told you that voice is lying? What if the entire narrative you've built about yourself is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how your brain works? Because here's what the research actually shows. ADHD brains aren't defective, they're different. And in many cases, they're capable of things neurotypical brains struggle with. You know that hyperfocus I mentioned earlier? The one that lets you disappear into a task for hours when it genuinely interests you? That's not a quirk. That's a superpower that's been reframed as a liability because it doesn't fit the 9-to-5, spreadsheet and meetings model of productivity that dominates our world. Your ability to make connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. That's not scattered thinking. That's lateral creativity that leads to innovation. Some of the most groundbreaking ideas in history came from people whose brains refused to stay in the prescribed lanes. Your sensitivity to injustice, your emotional intensity, your ability to read a room in seconds, those aren't weaknesses. Those are forms of intelligence that don't show up on standardized tests but make you uniquely equipped to understand people, to create art, to see solutions that others miss. The problem isn't your brain. The problem is that we've built a world that only values one type of cognition, one speed, one way of processing information. And if you don't fit that mold, you're labeled as less than. Think about school for a second. Sit still. Be quiet. Focus on material that may or may not interest you for exactly 45 minutes, then switch subjects on command. Repeat for 13 years. Then we wonder why so many brilliant, creative, passionate people feel like failures. The system wasn't designed to create thinkers. It was designed to create workers. Compliant, punctual, obedient workers who could follow instructions without questioning them. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's just history. The modern education system emerged during the Industrial Revolution, when factories needed employees who could show up on time, perform repetitive tasks, and respect hierarchical authority. Schools became training grounds for factory floors. And here's what really gets me. We've moved past the Industrial Revolution. The factory jobs that system prepared us for, most of them don't exist anymore. They've been automated, outsourced, or simply eliminated. The economy now rewards exactly the traits school punished: creativity, independent thinking, risk-taking, the ability to teach yourself new skills quickly. Yet we're still using the same educational blueprint from 200 years ago. We're preparing kids for a world that no longer exists while penalizing them for the very qualities that would help them thrive in the world that does. Think about what happens when a child questions a teacher's method or suggests a different approach to a problem. In most classrooms, that's called disruption. That child gets labeled difficult, disrespectful, a troublemaker. But in the real world, that's called innovation. That's called critical thinking. That's called leadership. The exact behavior we discourage in school is what companies desperately seek in employees and what society needs in citizens. I'm not saying teachers are the enemy here. Most teachers are incredible people trapped in a broken system, trying their best with impossible constraints. Overcrowded classrooms, underfunded programs, Standardized tests that don't measure real learning, administrative policies that prioritize compliance over education. Teachers see the problem more clearly than anyone. They watch creative, curious 5-year-olds enter their classrooms and then witness that curiosity systematically crushed year after year. The problem isn't the people, it's the structure. It's the assumption that every human brain should develop on the same timeline, learn in the same way, and demonstrate understanding through the same assessments. And here's what's insane: we know this doesn't work. We have the research. We understand neuroplasticity now. We know that brains develop at wildly different rates. We know that creativity can't be standardized. We know that testing for memorization is not the same as testing for understanding. But we keep doing it anyway, because changing it would require us to admit something uncomfortable. That maybe the system was never really about education at all. Maybe it was about compliance. About creating workers who could follow instructions, sit still for 8 hours, and not question authority. And look, I'm not saying there's some grand conspiracy here. I'm not claiming there's a smoke-filled room where evil administrators plot against children. It's more insidious than that. It's a system that perpetuates itself because changing it feels impossible. Because we've invested so much in the infrastructure, the testing companies, the college admission systems, the teacher training programs built around this model. So we end up with this bizarre situation where everyone involved knows it's broken, but nobody has the power to fix it. Teachers know it's broken. Parents know it's broken. Students definitely know it's broken. Even administrators in their quieter moments will admit the system fails too many kids. But try to change it? You'll hit a wall of resistance from every direction. Colleges say they need standardized tests to compare applicants. Politicians say they need standardized tests to measure school performance. Testing companies say, well, they say whatever keeps them profitable. And meanwhile, children are growing up believing they're stupid because they couldn't memorize the capitals of countries they'll never visit, or because they couldn't sit still long enough to prove they understood a concept they actually grasped in 5 minutes. Here's what kills me. We treat education like it's a scarce resource that needs to be rationed, when in reality, learning is one of the most natural human drives we have. Children are learning machines. You don't have to force a toddler to learn language, they absorb it voraciously. You don't have to threaten a 5-year-old to make them ask questions, you have to beg them to stop. But by the time that same kid is 15, they're convinced they hate learning. They're burned out, anxious, and just trying to survive until graduation. So what happened? Did they suddenly become lazy? Less intelligent? Less curious? No. They were taught that mistakes are punishments, that not knowing something is embarrassing, that struggling means you're failing. And here's the sickest part: this isn't an accident. The system was literally designed this way, to create obedient workers, not independent thinkers. You want proof? Look at how schools measure success. Standardized tests, grades, compliance, sitting still for hours, memorizing answers instead of asking questions. That's not education, that's conditioning. And we wonder why so many people grow up terrified of trying new things, terrified of looking stupid, terrified of being themselves. Because we spent 12 years teaching them that curiosity gets you detention and conformity gets you gold stars. Now let's talk about something even darker. The way mental health is treated, or more accurately, ignored in schools. Kids are dealing with anxiety, depression, trauma, family chaos, poverty, real heavy stuff. And what does the system do? It tells them to sit down, shut up, and focus on algebra. There's no time for emotions, no space for vulnerability, no room for healing. Just keep moving, keep performing, keep pretending everything's fine. And if you can't, if you act out or shut down or cry in the bathroom, then you're the problem. You're disruptive, you're attention-seeking. You need to be fixed. I've seen kids punished for having panic attacks, suspended for trauma responses, failed because their home life was falling apart and nobody bothered to ask why. The message is clear: your mental health doesn't matter. Your pain doesn't matter. Only your productivity matters. And then we act shocked when those same kids grow into adults who can't ask for help, who think struggling means weakness, who'd rather suffer in silence than admit they're not okay. We did that. The system did that. But here's what really gets me. Schools love to preach about character building and life skills, right? Responsibility, resilience, independence. But then they micromanage every single aspect of a kid's day: when to eat, when to use the bathroom, what to wear, how to sit, what to think. You can't teach independence by controlling everything. And here's what's even more heartbreaking: these kids actually want rules. They want boundaries. Not because they're masochists, but because boundaries give them something to push against, something to help them define who they are. It's like learning to swim. You need the edge of the pool at first. But helicopter parents? They don't just stay at the edge, they jump in the water with you, hold you up, and never let you actually swim. I've talked to college professors who say they can spot these kids immediately. They're the ones who email 3 times about an assignment that's clearly explained in the syllabus. They're the ones whose parents, I'm not joking, call the dean to contest a B+. A B+, as if a grade slightly above average is some kind of human rights violation. And the students themselves? They're anxious wrecks. Because for 18 years they've been told they're special, they're gifted, they're destined for greatness, but they've never actually failed at anything, never actually struggled, never actually had to figure something out on their own. So when they hit that first real obstacle, when they get that first real criticism, they crumble, not because they're weak, but because nobody ever taught them how to be strong. There's this study from the University of Minnesota that tracked kids from helicopter homes into adulthood, and guess what? Higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety, lower life satisfaction. These kids were given everything except the one thing they actually needed, the chance to struggle. Because here's what we forget: struggle is not the enemy of success. Struggle is the mechanism of success. Every single person you admire, every person who's accomplished something meaningful, got there through failure and struggle and figuring it out the hard way. Nobody ever became resilient by having everything made easy. But we've created this culture where we protect kids from every possible discomfort, every possible failure, every possible hurt feeling. And we call it love. But is it? Or is it fear dressed up as love? Because here's what no one wants to admit: we're terrified of being alone with ourselves. Absolutely terrified. That silence, that empty apartment, that Saturday night with no plans and no notifications lighting up your screen, it feels like death. So we grab onto someone, anyone, and we convince ourselves it's connection, it's intimacy, it's love. But connection requires vulnerability, real vulnerability. Not the Instagram version where you post a crying selfie with a brave caption. I'm talking about the kind where you sit across from someone and say, "I don't know who I am anymore," and you don't follow it up with a joke or a disclaimer. You just let it hang there, raw and unfinished. Most relationships never get there. They hover in this middle space where you're close enough to feel safe but far enough to maintain the illusion. You share a bed, you share bills, you even share trauma, but you never quite share that deepest part, the part that's still confused, still afraid, still figuring it out. And maybe that's why we're so addicted to the beginnings, that rush of new relationship energy, where everything feels possible and nothing's been ruined yet. Before the patterns set in, before you start seeing your partner as an extension of your own needs, rather than a separate human with their own fears and contradictions. We fall in love with potential, with the story we're telling ourselves about who this person could be, who we could become together. And then reality shows up, messy, disappointing, deeply human reality, and we're shocked, betrayed even, like they broke some contract they never actually signed. You see it in how people talk about their exes. They changed. No, they didn't. You just finally saw them clearly. The fantasy ended, and the person was still standing there, flawed and complex and nothing like the screenplay you'd written in your head. And that's terrifying, isn't it? Because if they never changed, if they were always this way and you just couldn't see it, then what does that say about your judgment? What does that say about all those moments you were so sure, so certain this was real? It says you're human. That's all it says. You wanted connection so badly that you filled in the blanks with hope. You took fragments of a person and built a monument. And when reality couldn't support the weight of what you'd constructed, everything came crashing down. But here's what nobody tells you about that crash. It's not just the loss of them that breaks you. It's the loss of who you thought you were. The person who was loved by the version of them you created. The person who belonged in that beautiful story you were telling yourself. That person dies too. And you have to grieve both losses at once. I remember sitting in my car after it all fell apart, just staring at nothing, thinking about all the times I'd defended them, to my friends who saw the red flags, to my family who asked gentle questions, to that small voice inside me that kept whispering something's wrong here. I'd been so convinced everyone else just didn't understand, that what we had was special, different, deeper than what other people could see from the outside. I wore their skepticism like a badge of honor, proof that our connection was too profound for others to grasp. Looking back now, I see it differently. They weren't failing to understand. I was failing to listen. Because the truth is, when you're in the thick of limerence, you don't want outside perspective. You want validation. You want someone to look at your fantasy and say, yes, that's real, keep going, you're not crazy. And anyone who suggests otherwise becomes the enemy, the cynic, the person who just doesn't get it. You build walls around your limerence, protecting it from anything that might wake you up, and the person you're obsessed with. They're safe inside those walls with you, frozen in the perfect form you've given them, never aging, never changing, never disappointing you, until they do. Until reality finds a crack in those walls and floods in, and suddenly you're drowning in all the truth you've been holding back. And that's when you realize the fortress you built to protect your love was actually a prison for both of you. Because here's what nobody tells you about emotional honesty in relationships. It's not just about telling the truth. It's about creating a space where the truth can exist without destroying everything. And that's an art form most of us never learned. Think about how we're taught to communicate feelings. As kids, we're basically given two options: bottle it up or explode. There's no middle ground. No one sits us down and says, here's how you express disappointment without making someone feel attacked. Here's how you admit you're scared without making it their responsibility to fix you. So we grow up thinking vulnerability is binary. Either you're completely open, raw and bleeding, or you're locked down tight. Either you're that person who trauma dumps on the second date, or you're the one who says I'm fine even when your world is falling apart. But healthy emotional honesty, it lives in the nuance. It's knowing when to speak and when to sit with something first. It's understanding the difference between sharing your feelings and weaponizing them. It's saying I felt hurt when you did that instead of you always hurt me, you never care. I watched my friend Sarah learn this the hard way. She prided herself on being brutally honest with her boyfriend. Every insecurity, every passing thought, every moment of doubt, she'd lay it all on him immediately. She thought she was being authentic. She thought she was preventing secrets. What she was actually doing was making him responsible for managing all her emotions in real time. Every fear became his emergency. Every insecurity became his job to fix, and eventually he couldn't breathe under the weight of it all. The relationship ended, and she was devastated. I gave him everything, she said. I was completely honest. And she was. But honesty without boundaries isn't intimacy. It's emotional flooding. It's the difference between letting someone into your inner world and expecting them to live there full time, managing the weather. Real emotional honesty requires self-awareness first. It means processing enough of your own stuff that when you do share, you're offering insight, not just dumping raw anxiety onto someone else's lap. It means saying, I noticed I felt jealous when you mentioned your coworker. I know that's my insecurity talking, but I wanted you to know what I'm working through. That's vulnerability with ownership. That's honesty that invites connection instead of demanding rescue. Because here's the truth: emotional honesty without self-awareness isn't intimacy. It's just noise. And a lot of people confuse the two. They think that because they're saying how they feel, they're being vulnerable. But if every feeling becomes someone else's emergency, if every bad day becomes a reason your partner needs to drop everything and fix you, that's not sharing. That's outsourcing. Real emotional maturity is knowing the difference between I need support and I need you to solve this for me. It's knowing when to say, hey, I'm going through something and I just need you to listen, versus expecting your partner to read your mind, interpret your silence, and then feel guilty when they get it wrong. Because that's another trap people fall into. They treat their partner like an emotional detective. They leave clues. They sigh heavily. They say I'm fine in a tone that clearly means the opposite. And then they get upset when their partner doesn't crack the case. That's not communication. That's a test. And relationships built on tests don't last. They just exhaust everyone involved. So instead, try this. Say what you actually mean. If you're upset, say you're upset. If you need space, ask for space. If you need reassurance, don't fish for it through passive comments, just ask. I'm feeling a little disconnected lately. Can we spend some intentional time together this week? That's clear. That's honest. That's not playing games. And yeah, it might feel awkward at first. It might feel too direct, too vulnerable, like you're handing someone a weapon they could use against you. But that's the risk of intimacy. That's what separates surface-level relationships from the ones that actually matter. You have to be willing to be seen. Not just the polished version of yourself, Not just the highlights reel, but the messy, uncertain, still figuring it out version too. And that includes owning your patterns, because we all have them. We all have ways we shut down, ways we deflect, ways we protect ourselves that made sense once but don't serve us anymore. Maybe you withdraw when things get hard. Maybe you pick fights to create distance. Maybe you overgive to avoid being left. Whatever it is, part of growing up emotionally is recognizing it and then choosing differently. And this is where the real work starts. Because knowing your pattern isn't the same as breaking it. You can be fully aware that you self-sabotage when things get too good and still do it. You can know you push people away when you feel vulnerable and still lash out. Awareness is the first step, but it's not the finish line. So what comes next? Practice, repetition, choosing the harder, healthier response over and over until it becomes the default. It's not dramatic. It's not cinematic. It's slow, unglamorous effort. It's catching yourself mid-sentence and saying, actually, I need to rephrase that. It's feeling the urge to ghost someone and instead texting, I'm overwhelmed, but I care about you. It's sitting with the discomfort of being seen instead of retreating into your old defenses. And here's the hardest part: you won't always succeed. You'll slip. You'll revert. You'll have weeks where you feel like you've made real progress. And then one bad day will send you spiraling back into old habits. And that's when the shame creeps in. That voice that says, see, you're not actually changing. You're still the same mess you've always been. But that voice is lying, because growth isn't linear. It's not a straight climb up a mountain. It's more like walking through a dark forest where sometimes you circle back to the same clearing 3 times before you find the path forward. The fact that you slipped doesn't erase the progress. It just means you're human. One of the most underrated emotional skills is self-forgiveness. Not in the toxic positivity way where you brush everything off and pretend it doesn't matter, but the deep, honest kind where you look at your mistakes and say, that wasn't okay. I hurt someone. I hurt myself. And I'm going to do better next time. No dramatics. No self-flagellation. Just accountability and the quiet commitment to keep trying. Because here's what I've learned. Emotional maturity doesn't mean you stop making mistakes. It means you stop making the same mistake the same way for the same reason. It means your recovery time gets shorter. It means you can apologize without deflecting. It means you can admit when you're wrong without your whole identity collapsing. It means you stop needing to be right all the time, because your sense of safety isn't riding on it anymore. And here's where it gets really interesting. This shift affects your future in ways you never expected. Because when you're no longer haunted by the past, you stop projecting it onto everything ahead of you. You stop assuming the worst. You stop bracing for disaster. You stop treating every new opportunity like it's secretly a trap. Think about it. How many times have you sabotaged something good because you were waiting for the other shoe to drop? How many relationships have you ended prematurely because you were convinced they'd hurt you eventually? How many dreams have you abandoned before you even started because failure felt inevitable? That's unprocessed trauma whispering in your ear, telling you the future will look exactly like the past. But when you heal, that voice gets quieter, and suddenly hope doesn't feel naive anymore. It feels possible, realistic even. You start making plans without that constant undertow of dread. You start believing that good things can actually last. You start trusting that you're capable of handling whatever comes. Not because nothing bad will ever happen again, but because you've proven to yourself that you can survive it. That's the difference. Healing doesn't make you immune to pain. It makes you resilient to it. And resilience isn't about being tough or unbreakable. It's about knowing you can bend without shattering. It's about trusting your own capacity to heal, to adapt, to keep going even when things get hard. You stop living like you're one mistake away from total collapse. You stop treating yourself like you're fragile. You start taking risks again, not reckless ones, but the kind that actually matter, the kind that lead somewhere. You apply for the job you're not fully qualified for. You have the hard conversation instead of ghosting. You let yourself want things without immediately talking yourself out of them, because the past isn't dictating the terms anymore. You are, and maybe the biggest shift of all? You start forgiving yourself for the time you lost, because here's what nobody tells you about wasted time. It wasn't wasted if it taught you something. Those years scrolling, they showed you what emptiness feels like. Those nights binging shows, they proved that comfort has diminishing returns. Those mornings sleeping in, they taught you that rest without purpose isn't rest at all, it's just avoidance with a pillow. You stop beating yourself up for not starting sooner. You stop imagining the alternate timeline where you were disciplined at 22. You stop romanticizing the person you could have been and start appreciating the person you're becoming. And that shift, that one psychological reframet's like removing a weight you didn't know you were carrying. Suddenly you're not running away from your past. You're not trying to outrun your mistakes. You're just moving forward, one small decision at a time. Here's where it gets really interesting. Around month 7, 8, maybe 9, you hit what I call the recognition point. This is when other people start noticing, not because you told them, not because you posted about it, but because you're different. You carry yourself differently, you speak differently, you show up differently. Your parents ask if you've been working out, your friends comment that you seem more focused, your coworkers notice you're contributing more in meetings, and the weird part? You haven't even hit your goals yet, you're still in process, still building, still becoming. But people can sense momentum. They can feel when someone has stopped drifting and started steering. And their recognition, it validates what you already knew but maybe didn't fully believe yet. You're actually doing this. This isn't another false start. This isn't temporary motivation. This is real change. And here's the paradox that'll mess with your head. Their validation matters less than it used to. A year ago, you would have craved this attention. You would have needed external confirmation to feel like you were on the right path. But now you've tasted something better than validation. You've tasted evidence. You have data. You have proof. You have a 12-month chain of decisions that speak louder than any compliment ever could. And maybe that's the most liberating realization of all, that you don't actually need them to validate what you've accomplished, because the validation is already embedded in the outcome. It's in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that you trusted yourself when everything felt uncertain. It's in the confidence that comes from having wrestled with complex problems and emerged with solutions that actually work. It's in the muscle memory your brain has developed, the instinctive way you now approach challenges that would have paralyzed you a year ago. You've become someone who doesn't wait for permission anymore. That's not arrogance. That's maturity. That's the natural result of doing hard things repeatedly until they reshape who you are. And here's what nobody tells you about that transformation. It makes you uncomfortable in your old skin. You start noticing how much time you used to spend seeking approval. You catch yourself about to apologize for taking up space, and you stop mid-sentence, realizing you have nothing to apologize for. You recognize the old patterns of self-doubt, but now they feel foreign, like clothes that no longer fit. This is where some people get nervous, because growth creates distance. The person you were a year ago wouldn't fully recognize the person you are now. Your old coping mechanisms feel juvenile. Your old excuses sound hollow. Your old fears seem smaller, almost quaint. And the people who knew that old version of you, they might struggle with this new one. They might prefer the version of you that needed reassurance, that asked for permission, that made them feel useful by requiring their validation. But you can't shrink back to accommodate their comfort. You can't unlearn what you've learned, unknow what you know, or unbecome who you've become. The knowledge is in you now. The capability is proven. The transformation is complete, and the only way forward is to own it fully, without apology, without hesitation, without waiting for someone else to tell you it's okay to be competent. Here's the uncomfortable truth they don't mention in graduation speeches: or growth will make some people defensive. Your progress will trigger their insecurities. Your refusal to stay small will feel like an accusation to anyone who's chosen comfort over challenge. And that's not your problem to fix. Your job isn't to manage other people's feelings about your evolution. Your job is to keep moving, keep learning, keep becoming more of who you're capable of being. Because here's what nobody tells you about growth. It's supposed to feel lonely at first. It's supposed to feel like you're walking away from something familiar. That discomfort isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. It's confirmation you're doing it right. Think about the lobster. When a lobster grows, its shell becomes too tight, too restrictive. It has to hide under rocks, vulnerable and exposed, while it sheds the old shell and grows a new one. That in-between phase, that's terrifying for the lobster. It's soft, defenseless, completely open to attack, but it's also the only way it grows. You're the lobster. That tight feeling in your chest when you're outgrowing your old life, that's your shell getting too small. That vulnerability when you're between who you were and who you're becoming, that's growth happening in real time. And yes, some people will try to pull you back into the old shell. They'll say things like, "You've changed," with disappointment in their voice. They'll reminisce about the old you like you've died instead of evolved. They'll make you feel guilty for wanting more than what once felt like enough. Let them talk. Because while they're busy mourning the version of you that kept them comfortable, you're becoming the version of you that makes you proud. And that trade, that's always worth it. I'm not saying abandon everyone who knew you before. I'm saying stop shrinking to make them feel better about staying the same. Stop dimming your progress because it highlights their stagnation. Stop apologizing for growing just because they chose not to. Real relationships evolve with you. The people who truly love you will celebrate your growth, even when it challenges them. They'll stretch to meet you at your new level instead of demanding you shrink back down to theirs. And the ones who can't, they're not your people anymore, and that's okay. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. You can appreciate what someone meant to your past without forcing them into your future. You can honor the role they played without giving them a permanent seat at your table. Gratitude and boundaries can coexist. That's the maturity we're after, the kind that doesn't confuse respect with obligation. Because the truth is, some people earn their place in your story, but not in your present life. And that's okay. You're not being cold. You're being honest. And honesty, real honesty, is the kindest thing you can offer, not just to others, but to yourself. Because here's what happens when you keep the door cracked open for people who should have stayed gone. You send yourself a message, a quiet one, a damaging one. You tell yourself that your boundaries are negotiable, that your peace is less important than their comfort, that your healing can wait if it means avoiding an awkward conversation. And over time, that message becomes a belief, and that belief becomes a pattern, and that pattern becomes your life. That's how people end up stuck, not because they don't want to move forward, but because they're dragging the entire past behind them like a parachute they refuse to cut loose. Let me be clear, you don't owe anyone access to your evolution. You don't owe anyone a front row seat to the version of you they never believed in. You don't owe anyone the privilege of watching you become everything they said you couldn't be. Your growth is not a spectator sport. And the people who doubted you? The ones who walked away when things got hard? The ones who showed up only when it was convenient? They don't get to cherry-pick their way back into your life just because you're thriving now. That's not how this works. You can't abandon someone in the dark and then ask for a flashlight when they finally find the sun. And yet, people try. Oh, they try. They'll show up with apologies that sound sincere but lack accountability. They'll reminisce about the good old days as if the bad ones never happened. They'll act like time heals everything, as if wounds close themselves without care, attention, and intentional repair. But you know better now. You've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, that closure doesn't require a conversation, that moving on doesn't need their permission. You've learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Silence isn't weakness, it's sovereignty. It's you deciding that not every offense deserves a response, that not every invitation deserves acceptance, that not every history deserves a sequel. But here's the part that catches most people off guard. Letting go isn't a one-time event. It's not a single conversation where you walk away and never look back. It's a practice, a discipline, a choice you have to make again and again, sometimes multiple times in the same day. You think you've let go. You feel lighter. You're moving forward. Then something small happens, a song on the radio, a street corner, a certain kind of laugh in a crowded room, and suddenly you're right back there, feeling everything all over again. And in that moment you have to choose again, not to forget, not to pretend it doesn't hurt, but to gently redirect yourself back to your present, back to your healing, back to your future. Because letting go isn't about erasing the past, it's about loosening its grip on your present. It's about saying, yes, that happened, yes, it mattered, but it doesn't get to narrate my entire story. The people who master letting go are not the ones who never look back. They're the ones who learn to look back without staying back. They can visit a memory without moving back into it. They can acknowledge pain without being consumed by it. They can respect what was without sacrificing what could be. And here's what makes this so powerful: when you stop clinging to what was, you create space for what's meant to be. That job you didn't get, it cleared the path for the one that actually fits your gifts. That relationship that ended, it freed you for the connection that actually sees your worth. That version of yourself you used to be, releasing it allowed you to become who you're meant to be. Letting go isn't loss, it's making room. It's clearing the table so the next course can be served. It's emptying the cup so it can be filled with something new. It's opening your hands so you can receive what's coming. But you can't do that with clenched fists. You can't catch the future while you're still gripping the past. And yes, that's terrifying. Because what if you let go and nothing comes? What if you release what you know and the unknown swallows you whole? That's the fear that keeps people stuck for years. decades even. They'd rather hold on to something familiar, even if it's hurting them, than risk the uncertainty of what comes next. But here's the truth: they eventually discover holding on doesn't prevent the pain. It prolongs it. The people who finally break free from this pattern don't do so because they suddenly become fearless. They do it because they realize that the fear of staying has finally outgrown the fear of leaving. There's a tipping point, a moment when the weight of compromise becomes heavier than the weight of uncertainty. And that's when transformation begins. I've watched people spend years building a life with someone, intertwining their routines, their finances, their social circles, their very identities, only to realize they've been building on quicksand. The foundation was never solid. But by the time they notice, they're so deeply invested that walking away feels like demolishing everything they've worked for. So they stay, they renovate, they patch the cracks. They tell themselves it's fixable. But you can't fix a foundation that was never meant to hold the weight of forever. The most painful part isn't the breakup itself, it's the recognition of all those moments when you knew something was wrong but chose to ignore it. It's the retrospective clarity that comes flooding in, showing you every red flag you rationalized, every boundary you let slide, every time you silenced your intuition because acknowledging the truth would have required action you weren't ready to take. And here's what nobody talks about. The version of yourself you become while staying in the wrong relationship isn't who you really are. It's a diminished version, a compromised version. You start editing your thoughts before you speak them. You suppress your needs to avoid conflict. You shrink yourself to fit into a space that was never designed for your full presence. And slowly, imperceptibly, you forget what it feels like to be wholly yourself. The tragedy isn't just the time lost, it's the self lost. The dreams deferred. The opportunities declined because they didn't fit into the narrative of the relationship you were trying to make work. Every maybe someday that became probably never. Every spark of possibility you let die because keeping the peace felt more important than honoring your own becoming. And here's what makes this particularly cruel. Those sacrifices, they weren't building anything. They were feeding a void. You thought you were investing in a future together, but you were actually just making smaller and smaller deposits into an account that would never show a balance. The career advancement you turned down because it would require moving and they refused to consider relocating. The graduate program you didn't apply to because the timing wasn't right for the relationship. The business idea you shelved because they needed your attention, your reassurance, your constant presence to feel secure. You told yourself it was compromise. Partnership, love, but compromise implies both people adjusting. Partnership means mutual investment. And love shouldn't require you to systematically dismantle everything that makes you who you are. What you were actually doing was appeasing, managing, shrinking yourself to fit into increasingly smaller spaces, hoping that if you could just become compact enough, undemanding enough, easy enough to love, then finally, the relationship would stabilize. It never did, because the problem wasn't your size. The problem was that you were trying to build a foundation on quicksand, and every sacrifice you made just added more weight to something that was never meant to hold. And the most painful part? You can't get those years back, those opportunities. They had expiration dates. That job offer came once. That friendship circle that eventually stopped inviting you because you always said no, they've moved on. That version of yourself who was brave enough to dream big, she's buried under so many layers of not now and maybe later that you barely recognize her anymore. The grief of this realization sits in your chest like a stone. Not just grief for the relationship that ended, but grief for the life you didn't live while you were trying to make that relationship work. You grieve the person you could have become if you'd spent that energy on yourself instead of on someone who was never going to meet you halfway. And that grief is valid. It deserves space. It deserves acknowledgement. Because what you lost wasn't just time, it was possibility. It was the version of yourself that could have been flourishing while you were busy dimming your own light to make someone else comfortable. You start to understand that emotional unavailability doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's often a choice made repeatedly, day after day. It's the choice to prioritize comfort over connection, to choose safety over vulnerability, to choose the familiar emptiness over the uncertain richness of genuine intimacy. And here's what hurts most. You realize they probably knew, maybe not consciously, maybe not in words they could articulate, but on some level, they knew they were only giving you fractions of themselves. They knew you were offering more than they were willing to return. They knew, and they chose to take it anyway. This knowledge doesn't make you bitter, at least not forever. Eventually it makes you wiser. It teaches you that love without emotional presence is just going through motions. That consistency matters. That words without follow-through are just noise. That you deserve someone who doesn't make you feel crazy for wanting basic emotional reciprocity. The hardest part of moving forward is learning to trust your perceptions again, because they trained you to doubt yourself. Every time you pointed out the distance, they made it your problem, your neediness, your insecurity, your expectations being too high, until you couldn't tell anymore what was reasonable to ask for and what was demanding too much. So you start small. You start listening to that quiet voice inside that you learn to silence. When something feels off, you let yourself feel it without immediately explaining it away. When someone's actions don't match their words, you notice it without making excuses for them. You practice trusting that your needs aren't burdens and your feelings aren't inconveniences. You learn that being alone feels different than being lonely in someone's presence. That silence in solitude is actually peaceful, while silence with an emotionally unavailable person is suffocating. You discover that you can have difficult conversations without shrinking yourself, that you can express disappointment without weaponizing it, that you can receive criticism without your world collapsing. These are the skills that only come from doing the work, from sitting with discomfort instead of distracting yourself from it, from choosing accountability over victimhood, from building a relationship with yourself that's honest instead of comfortable. And here's what nobody tells you about healing. It doesn't move in a straight line. There will be days when you feel completely transformed, when you catch yourself responding to situations with wisdom you didn't know you possessed. And then there will be days when you feel like you've learned nothing, when old patterns resurface so quickly you barely recognize the trigger before you're already reacting. That's not regression. That's the spiral of growth, you keep encountering the same lessons at deeper levels, peeling back new layers each time. You'll have moments where you meet someone new and feel that familiar pull, that magnetic attraction that used to mean, this is the one, but now you pause. You notice. You ask yourself what this feeling actually is. Is it genuine connection? Or is it the intoxicating rush of potential abandonment? Is it their authentic self you're drawn to, or the fantasy you're already constructing? Are you responding to who they are, or who you need them to be? This is the gift of pattern recognition, not to make you cynical, but to make you conscious. Not to keep you isolated, but to help you choose differently. Because awareness without judgment is the foundation of change. You're not analyzing every interaction to protect yourself from ever being hurt again. You're simply paying attention so you can distinguish between what's real and what's familiar. And sometimes the hardest realization is that healing means outgrowing people you genuinely loved. Not because they're bad people, but because they're committed to patterns you're no longer willing to participate in. It means accepting that you can love someone deeply and still recognize that being close to them is incompatible with your growth. That honoring what you once shared doesn't mean sacrificing what you're becoming. And here's the paradox that nobody warns you about. The moment you commit to this journey, the moment you decide that your peace matters more than their approval, something unexpected happens. You start to feel guilty, not because you've done something wrong, but because for so long your identity has been wrapped up in being the person who stays, the one who fixes, the one who bends. And now, by choosing yourself, it feels like betrayal. You lie awake at night replaying conversations that haven't even happened yet, imagining their hurt, their confusion, the way they'll tell the story to others, painting you as the one who changed, who left, who gave up. And part of you wants to rush back, to smooth it over, to prove you're still the person they remember. But here's what I need you to understand. Guilt is often just the death rattle of an old identity. It's the part of you that was trained to believe your worth comes from how much you endure, how much you accommodate, how small you can make yourself to fit into someone else's life. That guilt isn't proof you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're doing something different, and different feels dangerous when you've spent your whole life playing it safe. When you've built your sense of self around being needed, being dependable, being the rock that everyone else leans on, choosing yourself feels selfish. It feels like you're breaking an unspoken contract. But what if the contract was unfair to begin with? What if you signed it before you knew any better? Before you understood that relationship should add to your life, not diminish it? The people who truly love you will adjust. They might be confused at first. They might push back, test your boundaries, wait for you to return to factory settings. But if the foundation is real, they'll meet you where you are. They'll respect the person you're becoming, even if it requires them to grow too. and the ones who can't, the ones who need you to stay stuck in order to feel comfortable. They were never supporting your journey, they were supporting their version of you, the one that made them feel better about their own lack of movement. Here's what nobody tells you about growth. It's threatening, not because you're doing anything to anyone, but because your evolution holds up a mirror to everyone around you. When you start choosing discipline over comfort, suddenly the people who chose comfort feel judged even though you never said a word. When you start setting boundaries, the people who've been crossing them feel attacked even though you're just protecting your peace. Your transformation doesn't diminish them, but it does illuminate choices they've been avoiding. I learned this the hard way with a childhood friend. We grew up together, went through everything side by side. But when I started changing, reading more, questioning more, building something meaningful, he took it personally. Every conversation became a defense of his choices. Every achievement I shared was met with subtle dismissal or a story about why he couldn't do the same thing. It wasn't hatred, it was fear. Fear that if I kept growing, I'd outgrow him. Fear that my success would highlight his stagnation. Fear that our paths were diverging and he didn't have the courage to walk his own. I spent months trying to make him comfortable with my growth. I downplayed my wins. I stopped talking about my goals. I tried to be the old version of myself whenever we hung out. And you know what happened? I started resenting him and myself because I was choosing his comfort over my evolution. That's the trap of people-pleasing. It convinces you that maintaining peace is the same as protecting love. But real love doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't demand that you stay small so someone else can feel big. I realized something powerful. Every time I dimmed my light for him, I was teaching him that my needs didn't matter. I was training him to expect less from me. And worse, I was training myself to expect less from myself. So I stopped, not with anger, not with resentment, but with quiet, unshakable clarity. I started saying what I actually wanted. I stopped over-explaining my decisions. I stopped asking permission to take up space in my own life. And you know what happened? He was uncomfortable, really uncomfortable. He accused me of changing, of being selfish, of not caring about us anymore. And for a moment I almost believed him, almost went back to the version of me that kept everyone calm. But then I asked myself, if someone only loves the version of me that never challenges them, never grows, never asks for more, do they actually love me? Or do they just love how easy I make their life? That question changed everything. Because the truth is, you can't betray yourself and call it loyalty. You can't abandon your dreams and call it compromise. You can't sacrifice your voice and call it harmony. Real relationships, the ones worth keeping, they don't require you to become less. They invite you to become more. They celebrate your growth, even when it's messy. They adjust, they stretch, they evolve with you. And the ones that can't, the ones that need you frozen in time, manageable, predictable, small, those aren't your people. Not really. Letting go of that relationship was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the most honest, because I finally chose myself, not out of ego, not out of spite, but out of deep, sacred respect for the life I'm here to live. And here's what nobody tells you about that moment when you finally stop betraying yourself for someone else's comfort. You don't just lose the relationship, you find yourself again, and that's not a metaphor. I mean, literally, you wake up one morning and realize you've been living someone else's story. You've been following a script written by people who don't even know your middle name, don't understand what keeps you awake at 3 a.m, don't see the version of you that exists when nobody's watching. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: most of the relationships we think we're sacrificing ourselves to save were never designed for our full, authentic self in the first place. They were built around a smaller, quieter, more manageable version of who we are. The version that doesn't ask difficult questions. The version that accepts breadcrumbs and calls it a feast. The version that apologizes for needing things. And when you start expanding beyond that box, when you start asking for what you actually need instead of what you think you're allowed to want, suddenly you're the problem. Suddenly you're too much, or too sensitive, or creating drama. But you're not creating anything. You're just refusing to pretend anymore. I've watched people spend years trying to fix relationships that were fundamentally incompatible from the beginning. Not because there was anything wrong with either person, but because they were trying to force two completely different life trajectories into the same narrow path. And instead of acknowledging that fundamental mismatch, they just kept sacrificing more of themselves, thinking if they could just shrink enough, bend enough, disappear enough, it would finally work. It never does. Because real compatibility isn't about molding yourself into someone else's ideal. It's about finding someone whose growth trajectory runs parallel to yours. Someone who celebrates your expansion instead of feeling threatened by it. Someone who wants you to take up space, not because they're selfless or sacrificial, but because your bigness doesn't diminish theirs. And until you understand that difference, until you stop confusing self-abandonment with love, you'll keep finding yourself in the same patterns, just with different faces. The truth is, the right relationships don't require you to betray yourself. They invite you to become more of who you actually are. That's why the most important question isn't how do I make them love me? It's what am I willing to sacrifice of myself to keep this? Because when the answer is everything, you're not in love, you're in survival mode. And here's what makes it even more complicated. Sometimes the person asking you to change isn't some villain in your story. They genuinely believe they're helping you become better. They see your rough edges and think smoothing them down is an act of care. They criticize your choices because they think their way is superior. They minimize your feelings because emotions make them uncomfortable, and they've convinced themselves that teaching you to suppress yours is somehow doing you a favor. But intention doesn't erase impact. Someone can mean well and still hurt you deeply. They can love you and still be wrong for you. They can want your happiness while simultaneously destroying the parts of you that actually experience joy. I've watched people completely transform themselves for a relationship, believing that if they just became what their partner wanted, everything would finally work. They changed their appearance, their friend group, their hobbies, their communication style, their goals. And you know what happened? The relationship still fell apart. Because you can't build a lasting connection on the foundation of one person's continuous self-erasure. The cruelest part? After it ends, you look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself. You've spent so long becoming someone else that you've forgotten who you were before. Your opinions sound hollow because they're not really yours. Your interests feel borrowed. Even your laugh sounds different, quieter, more careful, designed not to be too loud or too much. And now you have to do the hardest work of all. Excavating yourself from beneath all those layers of performance. You have to remember what you liked before someone told you it was stupid. You have to rediscover your voice before you learn to make it smaller. You have to figure out who you are when you're not constantly calculating what version of yourself will be most acceptable. This is the real cost of betraying yourself for love. It's not just the relationship you lose, it's the time you spent as a stranger to yourself,